Chapter 6, Part 2 of Aircraft and Submarines by Willis J. Abbott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by William Tomcho. The Training of the Aviator, Part 2. His first flight the novice makes in a machine especially fitted for instruction. The levers are fitted with double handles, so that both learner and tutor may hold them at once. If the greenhorn pushes when he should pull, the veteran's grip is hard on the handle to correct the error before it can cost two lives. For in the air there is little time to experiment. Either set of controls will steer the machine. The pupil grasps his levers and puts his feet on the pedals. At first the instructor will do the steering, the pupil following with hands and feet as the motions made by the instructor are communicated to him by the moving levers. For a time the two work together. Then, as the instructor senses that the student himself is doing the right thing, he gradually lessens his own activity until after a few days' practice the student finds that he is flying with a passenger and directing the machine himself. In France, at any rate, they teach in brief lessons. Each flight for instruction is limited to about 5 minutes. At first the student operates in a penguin, a machine which will run swiftly along the ground but cannot rise. It is no easy trick at first to control the penguin and keep its course direct. Then he will try the jumps in a machine that leaps into the air and descends automatically after a 20 to 40 yards flight. As Darius Green expressed it so long ago, the trouble about flying comes when you want to alight. That holds as true today with the most perfect airplanes. As in boyhood days when one jumped from the barn in perfect confidence that the family umbrella would serve as a parachute. To alight with an airplane, the pilot, supposing his descent to be voluntary and not compelled by accident or otherwise, surveys the country about him for a level field, big and clear enough for the machine to run off its momentum in a run of perhaps 200 yards on its wheels. Then he gets up a good rate of speed, points the nose of the plane down at a sharp angle to the ground, cuts off the engine, and glides. The angle of the fall must be great enough for the force of gravity to keep up the speed. There is a minimum speed at which an airplane will remain subject to control. Loss of speed, perte de vitesse, as the French call it, is the aviator's most common peril in landing. If it occurs after his engine is cut off and he has not the time to start it again, the machine tilts and slides down sideways. If it occurs higher up, a vrille is the probable result. In this the plane plunges toward the ground, spinning round and round, with the corner of one wing as a pivot. In either case a serious accident is almost inevitable. In fact, the land is almost as dangerous to the navigator of the air as it is to him of the sea. To make good landings is an art only perfected by constant practice. To shut off the engine at precisely the right moment, to choose an angle of descent that will secure the greatest speed, and at the same moment bring you to your landing place, to change at the most favorable time from this angle to one that will bring you to the ground at the most gentle of obtuse angles, and to let your machine, weighing perhaps a ton, drop as lightly as a bird and run along the earth for several hundred feet before coming to a full stop, are all features of making a landing which the aviator has to master. In full air there are but few perils to encounter. All airmen unite in declaring that even to the novice in an airplane there is none of that sense of dizziness or vertigo which so many people experience in looking down from high places. The flyer has no sense of motion. A speed of 40 miles an hour and of 100 miles are the same to him. As he looks down the earth seems to be slipping away from him and moving by, tailwards, like an old-fashioned panorama being unwound. Everything about the control of an airplane has to be learned mechanically. Once learned, the aviator applies his knowledge intuitively. He "senses" the position and progress of the craft by the feel of the controls, as the man at the yacht's tiller tells mysteriously how she is responding to the breeze by the "feel." Even before the plane responds to some sudden gust of wind, or drops into a hole in the air, the trained aviator will foresee precisely what is about to happen. He reads it in some little thrill of his lever, a quiver in the frame, as the trained boxer reads in his antagonist's eyes the sort of blow that is coming. This instinctive control of his machine is absolutely essential for the fighting pilot who must keep his eyes on the movements of his enemy, watch out for possible aircraft guns below, and all the time be striving to get an advantageous position whence he can turn his machine gun loose. A row of gauges, dials, a compass, and a map on the frame of the car in which he sits will engage his attention in any moments of leisure. It is needless to remark that the successful pilot must have a quick eye and steady nerves. Nerves and rapidity of thought save the aviator in many a ticklish position. It is perhaps a tribute to the growing perfection of the airplanes that in certain moments of peril the machine is best left wholly to itself. Its stability is such that if freed from control it will often right itself and glide safely to earth. This not infrequently occurs in the moment of the dreaded perte de vitesse, to which reference has been made. In his book, With the French Flying Corps, Mr. Carroll Dana Winslow, a daring American aviator, tells of two such experiences, the one under his observation, the other happening to himself. The modern airplane is naturally so stable, he says, that if not interfered with it will always attempt to right itself before the dreaded vrille occurs, and fall en fuite morte, like a leaf dropping in an autumn breeze, is what this means, and no other words explain the meaning better. A curious instance of this happened one day as I was watching the flights and waiting for my turn. I was particularly interested in a machine that had just risen from the grande piste. It was acting very peculiarly. Suddenly its motor was heard to stop. Instead of diving it commenced to wobble, indicating a perte de vitesse. It slipped off on the wing and then dove. I watched it intently, expecting it to turn into the dreaded spiral. Instead, it began to climb. Then it went off on the wing, righted itself, again slipped off the wing, volplaned, and went off once more. This extraordinary performance was repeated several times, while each time the machine approached nearer and nearer to the ground. I thought that the pilot would surely be killed. Luck was with him, however, for his slip ceased just as he made contact with the ground and he settled in a neighboring field. It was a very bumpy landing, but the airplane was undamaged. The officers rushed to the spot to find out what was the matter. They found the pilot unconscious, but otherwise unhurt. Later in the hospital he explained that the altitude had affected his heart and that he had fainted. As he felt himself going, he remembered his instructions and relinquished the controls, at the same time stopping his motor. His presence of mind and his luck had saved his life. His luck, I say, for had the machine not righted itself at the moment of touching the ground, it would have been inevitably wrecked. The spectacle, though terrifying, proved valuable as an education to young Winslow, who a few days later was ordered to a test of ascension of 2,000 feet. This is his story: "I had a narrow escape. I had received orders to make a flight during a snowstorm. I rose to the prescribed height and then prepared to make my descent. A whirling squall caught me in the act of making a spiral. I felt the tail of my machine go down and the nose point up. I had a classical perte de vitesse. I looked out and saw that I was less than 800 feet above the ground and approaching it at an alarming rate of speed. I had already shut off the motor for the spiral, and turning it on I knew would not help me in the least. Suddenly I remembered the pilot who fainted. I let go of everything, and with a sickening feeling I looked down at the uprushing ground. At that instant I felt the machine give a lurch and right itself. I grabbed the controls, turned on the motor, and resumed my line of flight only 200 feet in the air. I had had a very close call, not as close as the man who fainted, but sufficiently so for me." We have said that the process of training a flyer is remarkably expeditious. So far as the fundamentals of his profession are concerned, it is. But his education, in fact, never ends. In the mere matter of reconnaissance, for example, experience is everything. One might imagine that 10,000 men marching on a road would look alike in numbers whatever the nationality. Not so. To the untrained eye 5,000 or 6,000 French troops will look as numerous as 10,000 British or Germans. Why? Because the French march in much more extended order. Into their democratic military methods the precision and mechanical exactitude of German drill do not enter. With the same number of troops they will extend farther along the road by at least a third than would a detachment of either of the other armies. And again great skill has been developed in the course of the war in the art of concealing positions and particularly in disguising cannon. The art has given a new word to the world camouflage. Correspondents have repeatedly told of their amazement in suddenly coming across a battery of 75's or a great siege gun so cunningly hidden in the edge of a thicket they would be almost upon it before detecting it. From an airplane 2,500 feet or more in the air, it requires sharp eyes to penetrate artillery disguises. A French poilu in a little book of reminiscences tells with glee how a German observation aviator deceived his batteries. A considerable body of French troops being halted in an open field, out of sight of the enemy batteries, found the glare of the sun oppressive, and having some time to wait, threw down their equipment and betook themselves to the cool shadows of a neighboring wood. Along came an enemy aviator. From his lofty height the haversacks, blanket rolls, and other pieces of dark equipment lying upon the grass looked like a body of troops resting. After sailing over and around the field twice, as though to make assurance doubly sure, he sailed swiftly away. In a very few minutes shells from a concealed battery began dropping into that field at the rate of several a minute. Every foot of it was torn up, and the French soldiers, from their retreat in the woods, saw their equipment being blown to pieces in every direction. The spectacle was harrowing, but the reflection that the aviator undoubtedly thought that he had turned his guns on a field full of men was cheering to them in their safety. An art which the fighting aviator must master early in his career is that of high diving. Many of us have seen a hawk, soaring high in air, suddenly fold its pinions and drop like a plummet full on the back of some luckless pigeon flapping along ungainly scores of feet below. Or a fish hawk drop like a meteor from the sky, with a resounding splash upon the bosom of some placid stream, and rise again carrying a flapping fish to his eyrie in the distant pines. The hunting methods of the hawk are the fighting methods of the airman, but his dives exceed in height and daring anything known to the feathered warriors of the air. Boelke, most famous of all the German airmen, or for that matter of all aerial fighters of his day, who in 1917 held the record for the number of enemy flyers brought down, was famed for his savage dives. He would fly at a great height, 15,000 or more feet, thus assuring himself that there was no enemy above him. When he sighted his prey he would make an absolutely vertical nose dive, dropping at the rate of 150 miles an hour or more, and spattering shots from his machine gun as he fell. 600 shots a minute and the sight of this charging demon were enough to test the nerve of any threatened aviator. In some fashion Boelke was enabled to give a slight spiral form to his dive, so that his victim was enveloped in a ring of bullets that blocked his retreat whichever way he might turn for safety. Personality in fighting counted much for success. Boelke's method, its audacity and fierceness, placed him first in the list of airmen with killing records. Captain Immelman, also a German, who rolled up a score of 30 enemies put out of action before he himself was slain, followed entirely different tactics. His battle maneuver savored much of the circus, including as it did complete loop-the-loop. For instead of approaching his adversary from the side, or, as would be said in the sea navy, on the beam, he followed squarely behind him. His study was to get the nose of his machine almost on the tail of the aircraft he was pursuing. This gave him, to begin with, what used to be called in the Navy a raking position, for his shots would rake the whole body of the enemy airplane from tail to nose, with a fair chance of hitting either the fuel tank, the engine, or the pilot. Failing to secure the position he most coveted, this daring German would surrender it with apparent unconcern to the enemy, who usually fell into the trap. For just as the foeman's machine came up to the tail of Immelman's craft, the latter would suddenly turn his nose straight to earth, drop like a stone, execute a backward loop, and come up behind his surprised adversary, who thus found the tables suddenly turned. These two German aviators long held the record for execution done in single combat. Boelke was killed before the air duel vanished, to be replaced by the battle of scores of planes high in air. Immelman survived longer, but with the incoming of the pitched battle his personal prowess counted for less and his fame waned. In July, 1917, arrangements were complete in the United States for the immediate training in the fundamentals of aviation of 10,000 young Americans. The expectation was that long before the end of the year facilities would be provided for the training of many more. Both France and Great Britain sent over squads of their best aviators, some of them so incapacitated from wounds as to be disqualified for further fighting, but still vigorous enough for the work of an instructor. The aerial service took hold upon the imagination and the patriotism of young America as did no other. The flock of volunteers was far beyond the capacity of the government to care for, and many drifted over into private aviation schools, which were established in great numbers. The need for the young students was admittedly great. More and more the impression had grown in both Great Britain and France that the airplane was to be the final arbiter in the war. It was hailed at once as the most dangerous enemy of the submarine and the most efficient ally of troops in the field. No number seemed too great for the needs of the Entente Allies, and their eagerness to increase their flying force was strengthened by the knowledge of the fact that Germany was building feverishly in order that its fleet in the air might not be eclipsed. Perhaps the best description of an idealized aviator was given by Lieutenant Lufbery of the Lafayette Escadrille, who came to the United States to assist in training the new corps of American flying men. Lufbery himself was a most successful air fighter, an ace several times over. Though French by lineage, he was an American citizen and had been a soldier in the United States Army. In October of 1917 his record was 13 Boches brought down within the Allied lines. In the Allied air service one gets no credit for the defeated enemy plane if it falls within the enemy lines. While young Americans were being drilled into shape for service in the flying corps, Lufbery gave this outline of the type of men the service would demand: "It will take the cream of the American youth between the ages of 18 and 26 to man America's thousands of airplanes, and the double cream of youth to qualify as chasers in the Republic's new aerial army. Intensive and scientific training must be given this cream of youth upon which America's welfare in the war must rest. Experience has shown that for best results the fighting aviator should be not over 26 years old or under 18. The youth under 18 has shown itself to be bold, but he lacks judgment. Men over 26 are too cautious. The best air fighters, especially a man handling a chaser, must be of perfect physique. He must have the coolest nerve and be of a temperament that longs for a fight. He must have a sense of absolute duty and fearlessness, the keenest sense of action, and the perfect sight to gain the absolute feel of his machine. He must be entirely familiar with aerial acrobatics. The latter frequently means life or death. Fighting 22,000 feet in the air produces a heavy strain on the heart. It is vital, therefore, that this organ show not the slightest evidence of weakness. Such weakness would decrease the aviator's fighting efficiency. The American boys who come over to France for this work will be subject to rapid and frequent variations in altitude. It is a common occurrence to dive vertically from 6,000 to 10,000 feet with the motor pulling hard. Sharpness of vision is imperative, otherwise the enemy may escape or the aviator himself will be surprised or mistake a friendly machine for a hostile craft. The differences are often merely insignificant colors and details. America's aviators must be men who will be absolute masters of themselves under fire, thinking out their attacks as their fight progresses. Experience has shown that the chaser men should weigh under 180 pounds. Americans from the ranks of sports, youth who have played baseball, polo, football, or have shot and participated in other sports will make the best fighting aviators. End of The Training of the Aviator, Part 2. Recording by William Tomcho.